Possession crucial from this. How much longer will the referee allow? Dublin lead by a point, and there's the whistle. It's over. It's over.
We earned it by winning the last 2 matches on the road, and that's not going to be taken away from us.
But what I love in hurling, I love players that will never give in.
He hits it. It's over the bar. Oh, holy Moses.
Hello, welcome to the RTÉ GAA Podcast. I hope you're all doing well. Delighted to say we have Eamonn Fitzmaurice with us, along with Rory O'Neill and Damian Lawlor, both of RTÉ, to look back on last weekend's Gaelic football and a chat about some of the repercussions and what's kind of come out of the weekend. And in a little while, we will have Derek McGrath on board to look ahead to this weekend's hurling. A few very interesting games to look at, and there was only one senior hurling match really last weekend, Wexford and Kilkenny, but there's been a lot made out of it because the spotlight was on it. As my father said to me, will you ever stop talking about Wexford? It's not doing us any good. And I said, well, that's what happens when there's only one game of a weekend. There tends to be a bit of a focus on you. But anyway, he's safe for 40 minutes because we're going to talk about football, or half an hour. Well, I say we're going to talk about football, but actually we're going to start with a little bit about Camogie, Damien, because this morning we're recording at noon on Wednesday. Peace has descended on the Camogie Valley at last. They have found a spot in the 2021 calendar to play the 2020 Provincial and All-Ireland Club Championships.
Yeah, so at about 6 o'clock this morning, I was in a correspondence with Hopper McGrath, the Sarsfield's Camogie manager, and Hopper, obviously, you don't know, lads, was a fine hurler for Galway in his day, but Sarsfields were one of 35 clubs that still had 2020 club championship games outstanding in the Camogie series. And when the Camogie Association decided to go league, club championship, inter-county championship, there was an outcry and an uproar from inter-county players, the WGPA, and inter-county managers. So they wanted a proper split season and blocks of it. So after about 2 weeks of tension there, the Camogie Association, maybe 1 week, Camogie Association took another look at it and said the feedback was that they needed to go back to the clubs and members to get a proper mandate to see what ultimately was the solution. So they went back to the clubs and members. This time around, they voted to have a split season, whereby it would be league into championship, then a block of club games, but on the condition that the 2020 club series would be gone. So clubs and members voted for that. And then once they voted for that, and that came in and the inter-county crowd were happy, the 2020 clubs that were still involved, they got very, very upset. And, I suppose they're quite entitled to it, but ultimately that's what the membership voted for. So I do feel sorry for the administrators. I feel sorry for the clubs involved as well, because they were caught in the crossfire. But this was getting messy now. I mean, this was going on for the last month, and we covered it extensively with RTÉ. You were looking at a DRA, Disputes Resolution Authority hearing on Friday night. That has now been averted after 4 hours of mediation talks last night, chaired, Hopper tells me, by Pádraig Duffy, the former Director General, who performed very, very impressively, according to Hopper. And as a result, the 2020
I'd say he's well used to mediation.
Yeah, and I'd say that's why he was drafted in, Rory. Yeah. And just to finish off then, I think the 2020 series will take place now in November. It'll be over by mid-December, maybe the 19th of December. That'll mean the 2021 series will be pushed back to early 2022. So it's been messy. You've had a new Camogie president into office. It hasn't been an easy introduction for her. You've had a battle between grassroots and inter-county. Many of them players will be on both sides of that camp. But it's resolved now, and there's no expense or kind of bad PR of a DRA hearing. It's done, finally.
Yeah, we hope, because it has been
for now.
It has been rumbling on for a while. Okay, we'll move from Camogie to tennis, obviously, because it's the story everybody's been talking about. It's very interesting. Naomi Osaka's withdrawal from the French Open after first stating that she would take her fines and not do any media because it was impacting on her mental health. First statement was probably a little bit unclear as to the depths of her feeling and the struggles she's had since winning the 2018 US Open, that she has actually suffered from depression, and shy person doesn't really like doing media. So I think her second statement when she withdrew from the French Open, I think, made it a lot clearer, and I think a lot of people probably came down more on her side of things, although I'll tell you there are many people in the media who are staunch defenders of the glory of a press conference, which I don't think any of the three journalists in this call are great lovers of a press conference. But I want to know what Eamonn Fitzmaurice thinks about a press conference. A lot more relaxed in the GAA normally. It tends to be a huddle outside a dressing room, or on the sideline for the league, maybe even early rounds of the provincial championship. But when you get to Croke Park, there is that press conference room. You do your TV, you do your radio, and then you're trundled in for the press. How did you find doing that, Eamonn?
When you won, it was grand, Mikey. It was no problem. The days you lost, of course, it was a bit harder. But look, I always saw it as part of the duty of being a manager, and I always did it. I never shirked the responsibility. But one thing I always did, win or lose, was I gave myself a chance before doing an interview. I would always prioritize speaking to the players first, straight after a game, and that gave me a chance to gather my thoughts then as well. Because I suppose from the media perspective, probably the goal is when you catch someone straight away and they're either high after a victory or they're raw after defeat, and you probably get them at their most honest. But I always,
that's when we want you, all right, yeah.
Yeah, even with John Kiley recently, there, very measured, very steady always, and with the comments about Galway was straight after the game. And I think it's easy to be a bit raw in that kind of a situation. So I always try to give myself a bit of time and just gather my thoughts, and try to be measured enough then and fair in the press conference. And of course, if there was something that you felt needed to be said, you'd say it. But for the most part, it was a kind of a political exercise, really.
Yeah, a manager in a team sport probably is never going to talk himself out of doing it. The odd one you could say, obviously, take your fine or whatever. I will not speak, Jose Mourinho, whatever it is.
Well, Fergie didn't talk to the Beeb for, was it 10 years as well? Yeah.
Yeah, and he could take his fines. He had the political power. Individual sports people is more interesting, but I would imagine, Eamonn, you had players who you played alongside and who played under you who were just uncomfortable with the idea of doing media and probably swerved every press night, swerved every post-match interview. And I suppose in a team sense, it's an easier decision to make, and you won't get that spotlight on you unless you are, the superstar. Unless you're David Clifford and you're refusing to do media, people might notice. But if you're a cog in the team, even a team as good as Kerry, you can slip away and not do that media if you don't want to do it.
You can, absolutely. And I think it's probably easier to manage for people now, probably to the detriment of getting to know the players. The kind of Sunday feature that would have been a thing 20 years ago, where a player would sit down and have a big sit down with a journalist, and you get a bit of insight into them and into their story. That's not as common anymore. You might get one at the end of the season, but during the season, they're very rare. So it is easier for players, and I think only fairly so. Some players are very comfortable dealing with the media, some aren't. And, particularly in an amateur sport, I never had a problem with lads that didn't want to talk to the media. In the early part of my own career, it was something I avoided. When Jack O'Connor came in, he asked me, would it be something I would do as one of the players that would kind of speak to the media, and I did it, and I had no problem doing it. But I think as you go through different phases in your career, when you're younger, maybe it is wise to probably not set yourself up for a fall. As you become a bit more mature and established, you understand the pitfalls around it. But in general, I think, looking at it from the media perspective, it is a very sterile environment now, and it's hard to get the kind of colour stories and the interesting stories during the season. And I understand that that's not great. But at the same time, when, the leading teams, when you look at the Dubs and the way they manage their message, you're not going to be putting yourself out there then when you're on their coattails. So I'm not sure what the answer to it is, but it's certainly managed very well now by all counties, really.
Yeah, it's Rory. I know you as the producer of the Sunday game have your running battle sometimes trying to get a man of the match out or whatever, but the press conference is kind of a different animal, and I have kind of mixed feelings on it myself. I think I don't think journalists can be too high and mighty about, you have to do a press conference, when there's many a press conference that many a journalist that says, I'm not bothered going to that. That guy's no good. He doesn't give good quotes. I won't bother with that. I don't need quotes from this one. So the media does need to be fed, particularly rights holders and stuff, which is kind of the perspective you'd have. But I think it's a dangerous game to suggest. Personally, I think it's a dangerous game to make a press conference an obligatory matter for, be it an individual sports person like a golfer or a tennis player or a member of a sports team.
I couldn't understand why they couldn't come up with some sort of happy medium, given the status and the stature of someone of her standing in the game, that they couldn't like agree to. Okay, you mightn't have to do, you mightn't have to sit. Like I from what I can gather, they have to go in there and they have to put themselves in front of the press corps for, I don't know, half an hour, 40 minutes, shorten it down, say it's a limit of 4 or 5 questions, no repeat questions. We're going to talk to X, Y, Z, and D, and then just move it on. Like I would have an element of not necessarily suspicion. I find sometimes that the mantle of mental health can be tossed around quite flagrantly. As somebody who has very, very, a very, very acute understanding from my own situation, my own family situation, of the pitfalls of mental health and what mental health, the impact that can really have on an individual. I think I've seen it a few times now where professional athletes simply just don't want to do something, and they might throw this out there. Not just professional athletes, it's anybody that's in the spotlight, and it's not a case of that we're all sitting down looking for her to brandish and furnish her psychiatric reports. But at the same time, I'm sure this is something that she has been accustomed to dealing with for the best part of, I don't know what age she is. She's probably in her early 20s. So she's been on the, because they go into the circuit very young, particularly women. Like, so she's been on the circuit probably since she's 13 or 14. So she's well used to it. I'd say personally, it looks to me like she's just fed up of it, answering the same stupid questions over and over again. And just wants to concentrate on her tennis, and more power to her. I just don't, I think in a roundabout way, I think she's been badly advised by the people closest to her. And I think they could have, as I said, they could have come to some sort of understanding and some compromise situation where everybody would have saved face, and the media gets its tuppence worth and a few quotes, which are always meaningless anyway. A lot of these, I mean, Mikey, you've been at these press conferences. Damien, you've been at them, and I'm sure Eamonn, you might have had to sit through one or two or yourself. They're fairly mundane, rudimentary. They're like, I mean, does anything ever outlandish or crazy happen in them anyway? I mean, I don't know.
No, I can actually, in a previous life, I did cover Wimbledon one year when I worked in London, and it was very interesting. It's probably the best sporting event I've ever been at, actually, in terms of just how well organized it is. The tennis is stupendous and everything, but the press conferences are probably 5, 10, 15 minutes, and for Wimbledon they're packed. And I would say I was bullied by the Williams sisters one day when they were after winning a doubles match, and they were playing each other in the final or a semi-final about 2 days later. And I asked them, I said something like, well, so what will you do now for the next couple of days? Will you avoid each other? Will you still practice together? Because, you're playing each other in such a huge match.
Good question.
Perfectly legitimate question.
Yeah.
One of them, I think it was Serena, just looked at me and she says, next question, please. I'm not answering such an unimaginative question. And there was an awkward silence. And they didn't answer it. And as we were leaving
slapped down by Serena.
Big time. And as we were leaving, I got a load of pats on the back from journalists. Jesus, that was rough. You didn't deserve that. That was bad. So these press conferences, like, if certain players can handle them, certain can't. But Damien, what Rory says is a fair point, isn't it? You can count on, probably in your long, distinguished journalistic career, you can probably count on 2 hands post-match press conferences you went to that were really worthwhile.
Yeah, like, I think from a reporter's point of view, Mikey, and that's right, Rory. Like, I mean, the press conference itself would never have excited me too much. If you have, I remember very, very early days I was covering soccer, and you'd be sent out to a kind of the Dublin city or the airport, and you might get into a huddle with Roy Keane, and you just be hanging on every word he said. But by and large, they're fairly forgettable. But I think that, I would have interviewed Eamonn when he was Kerry manager before and after games for a number of years. And like, I think what it comes across from a reporter's point of view on those occasions, like, for me, you're just looking to get an insight into where the game was won and lost. You know, I've been lucky enough that, you know, have some really, really good players and managers would chat to you and open up to you. Like, I mean, Colin O'Riordan after the Munster final last year. But
brilliant interview,
Shane Dowling before that with Sky when I was working there after Limerick won the All-Ireland. And, you know, just, you see, that connection came from knowing Shane's story and knowing the injury worries he had and checking in on him over the years just to see how he was doing. And, like, you just develop a kind of a connection with these lads and a trust. And once that trust is there, then I think that's hugely important, because you don't go looking for controversy. You go looking for an insight. There's a big, big difference. I think lads trust you. They'll open up to you a bit more. It's very, very simple. And I think, Eamonn, you might maybe give me your opinion on this, but there's several ways to ask a hard question too. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, like, the likes of Eamonn have devoted their whole lives, apart from their families and their jobs, to getting a team ready for a championship, to getting all the cogs and structures right. They've done everything they possibly can. They've put 40 hours a week probably over the period of the year, right up to when you interview them. And you have to respect that. And you have to respect that it mightn't have gone right for them on the day. And where did they think it didn't go right? Because once or twice I've put in my own words into a question. Like, I asked the manager one day who had, you know, his team had blown a lead and they lost the game by a point. And I asked him, was he frustrated? No, I think he clearly was, but he didn't like the word frustrated, and he pointed that out a few times. So I've learned from that, like, over the years, to keep my questions open-ended, because at the end of the day, they're the experts, not me. But what do they think? But I just feel maybe, Eamonn, you might have different. Maybe it's all the one who asked you the question, but I feel if you put a bit of empathy in there and show that you understand the game, you might get more out the other end as well.
Oh yeah, 100%, Damien. And look, I think everyone respects the fact that, you know, a journalist or reporter is there to do a job. I think, you know, sometimes you, especially after losing a game, you're going to be very disappointed. You're not really going to be wanting to go into it. And I think you're always very conscious as well that the following day's newspapers, you don't want, number one, to come across as a sore loser. You don't want to be throwing your own players under the bus. You know, you're trying to walk a fine line. Oftentimes you do have a good idea why things went wrong straight away, but you're not going to be, you know, like I said, you're not going to be overly critical of your own players. During the league, you might be trying something different and maybe vastly different. And again, you don't want to give that insight to your opponents that you are trying, whereas it's very natural to say, look, lads, hold on a second here. I'm trying a new defensive system, and that's why we're leaking goals at the moment, or whatever it is, because suddenly everyone is saying, oh, geez, what are they onto? What are they doing? And so on. So there's times you have to take the hit, and you just have to be gracious about it, and that's it. But I think, look, I have to say, hand in my heart, my dealings with the media for the whole time that I was involved as a manager, I think it's different as a manager and a player, but as a manager, I was dealt with very respectfully by the media, and I would have reciprocated that. I would have been open, and when I was available, I was available. When I wasn't available, I was very upfront about it, and, you know, I just said, no, we'll have a collective press conference in Tralee or Killarney on this date. I'll be available all that evening, all that day, but not until then, because I have to be focusing on the meantime. So I would have found the relationship very healthy, and, you know, I wouldn't have had, of course, there was times you disagree with what people had to say or write or whatever, but that's the nature of the business.
In 6 years, Mikey, you mentioned there about Dublin, and Dublin are a peculiar case, and I would have a certain amount of sympathy as well for Dublin, right? There is a proviso there in that they're obviously the most glamorous team in Gaelic games. They're living in a kind of a very big fishbowl up here, where their profile is through the roof, and the demands put on the players is extraordinary in terms of they're being pulled from pillar to post, whether it's medals and interviews and media and radio interviews and turning up to training sessions and presenting this and presenting that, and obviously the commercial opportunities that they have as well. But in the 6 years that Jim Gavin was manager of Dublin, I think he gave one interview, one post-match press conference where he said anything interesting at all, and that was in the wake of the Diarmuid Connolly suspension for 3 months. The time he pushed or manhandled or whatever with Kieran Brannigan, and it was extraordinary because it was one of those days that was meant to be a fairly average run-of-the-mill quiet day from the Sunday games point of view. I even remember writing the email saying it to Desi Dolan and Joe Brolly, who were on the panel that night. Very straightforward. Dublin are playing Westmeath, lads. It'll be a 20-point beating, nothing to worry about. Next thing, Jim Gavin walks into a press conference, refuses to cooperate with RTÉ, gets into a standoff with Robbie Irwin, slaughters Pat Spillane, slaughters Colin O'Rourke, calls into question their professions. The whole thing went off. It was just, it was funny.
Yeah. See, that's the thing. A press conference can be good, and I would say it'd be very dangerous. There's some, you see some sweeping statements. So they should be gone. There's no need for them in this day and age. There is a need for press conferences. They can be useful. The thing we don't understand in GA is that they're not obligatory. And they're not individual sports people, which is where I think he would have some.
There is a level
Naomi
of there is a level of paranoia though, guys, gone into it. I mean,
with some of them,
yeah, with some, there's media managers in there for the last few years, not just PROs now. The specialists brought in to deal with it, and you just have to say sometimes it's completely over the top. As Eamonn just pointed out. In 90% of cases, there's mutual respect there. Just get on with the job,
Yeah. Just trying
Pep
to
Guardiola one as well was the time with Mourinho when they were Barcelona against Real Madrid in the Champions League semi-final. That was another good one as well.
Yeah.
Pep had a bit of an explosion about. He's the Jeff and Jose is the Jeff in the press conference room. So that was another good one.
Yeah, I know there are some gems in there. Anyway, I guess now after covered the Camogie, we've covered the Gaelic football. Gaelic football is next on the list. Then, Eamonn, your former teammate and player Colin Cooper was pretty strong on the fact that there was no league finals in Division 2 and Division 4, and quite likely not in Division 1 or 3 either, without results going a certain way. Tyrone beating Kerry, and the other one, Dublin having to beat Donegal, and then Derry and Fermanagh have to win the semis in Division 3.
Correct.
Would it bother you particularly knowing now 3 games? It's been a 3-game league. You'll definitely have a 4th game. The 4th game is the one that matters in Divisions 2, 3, and 4. And not so much for the top half of Division 1. You're potentially playing a semi-final, which won't have the reward of a final. But is this been an unusual year? Has this league been a tune-up for Championship, particularly the top end of Division 1? And is it more important to avoid more soft tissue injuries than it is to have league finals?
It probably is, but I do think it's disappointing, all right, Mikey, that, look, we knew this from the start. It was flagged from the start. I can understand with the likes of Donegal involved in the preliminary in Ulster why there might be a bit of pressure there, but Kerry and Clare playing in Munster on the 26th of June, is there need for that to be played that early? Similar with the Connacht Championship, is there need for it to be starting that early? I don't know. And look, I know with fixtures, it is a minefield, and we have to take into account that, it's hard to balance everything. But I do feel that the football is getting a hard deal from the point of view. The hurling went back a week early. They're getting their league played off.
And the back door.
Could the football have got back the week early to play it off? And the fact that there's no back door. It's a bit disappointing. I do think it's disappointing that the finals aren't going to take place. But having said that, we've known that that's the way it's going to be since the start. It was well flagged. I imagine they looked at all permutations. The top 2 teams go straight to a final. The bottom 2 have a playoff for relegation. It leaves the middle 2. What do they do? Do they play a challenge game against each other? Do they play another regulation league game there that means nothing? So I'm sure they looked at everything, but definitely it's a bit unusual. I would have loved to have seen them gone back the week early, get the league final played. Of course, then you're taking into account the soft tissue injury situation that is becoming a bit of an epidemic, and then you're damned if you do, if you're damned if you don't then. So disappointing, but understandable maybe in one sense.
Yeah, it does seem to be, Eamonn, particularly say for teams that are less likely to progress in their provincial championships. It's almost a last year to an extent after one perhaps last year. I'll just use my own county as an example because it's an easy one. Wexford, they had 2 league games this year. They're playing Wicklow in the first round of the Leinster Championship. That may or may not. Obviously, they have a shot. They're not playing Dublin, so they have a shot. But They're playing Dublin if they do win that one. So, you're looking at a very short season, and they're playing a Shield final against Sligo.
Shield.
Yeah, it's not even... Leitrim gave them a walkover in the Shield semi-finals, and now they're playing Sligo in the final. If you're a Wexford football, we had Shane Roach on a few weeks ago. He was putting on a brave face, but it must be hard to motivate lads when they know that there's a good chance their season is going to be 5 games.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's all about the games, and it's all about playing the games. And I think you'd prefer to be managing soft tissue injury issues and trying to balance the load and all that kind of thing, rather than managing a group's kind of disappointment because they're playing so little. So yeah, it's not ideal. It's grand for the big teams that are going to advance through the championship, and it could become a fantastic romantic summer for them, similar to what happened with Cavan and Tipperary last year. But there are going to be a large majority of the counties that will be out early, and it'll be back to the clubs, and they'll get going there. But certainly, from the point of view of the inter-county stuff, it'll be a short season for them.
Damien, you are more familiar with the administration of the GAA than probably anybody here, which is saying something. Not including myself in that. I know bugger all. But
that just means I'm old, Mikey. That's all.
Yeah. But you were across all this in that long, anguished winter and early spring. Was it considered to push the club championships forward back by a couple of more weeks to give a little bit more space for the championship and then allow for a guaranteed league program? I presume they looked at that.
Yeah, well, Fitzy's after putting the finger on it there with you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because I think the message screaming through from grassroots was that 93% of the GAA's membership are club players, and there was just a huge need for club action, and there wasn't a lot of information coming from public health or the government for a period of time there. The season started back so late this year. The GAA were hoping that initially that it might have kicked off at the end of maybe February, to be fair about it, and that didn't happen. It was pushed way back, and I think they wanted to give teams in football, and there is no back door, but at least 5 games. And the hurling fraternity took the GAA's hand off when the extra couple of league games was offered to them. They even came back to training a week early when the GPA had been arguing that 4 weeks pre-season training was optimum. But I think they accepted 3 and they came back. But see, unfortunately, there's always a race for something in the GAA. The moment the games were cleared to resume, the race for challenge matches started, and the push for challenge matches started. Then we had to wait a little while for that. And when that was clear, then teams went at it hammer and tongs, and you were seeing injuries, soft tissue injuries everywhere. And I just feel like that even you saw with the Camogie row, nobody's ever happy about it. And I think we knew from the start that there wouldn't be any league finals played because they wanted to give counties a minimum of 5 games and have a free weekend going into the championship. Now, could you have peeled off a bit towards the latter end of the year and maybe shorten the club championship a bit more? You possibly could, but they also have 2020 club championships to complete. They have 11 counties who haven't completed 2020 yet, and they have to be fair to them. So, counties like Offaly, if they reach the Christy Ring hurling final, for example, when do they play the 2020 championship? Never mind the 2021. So, all the problems are mounting, and I suppose every stakeholder will take their own little slice out of it. But to be fair to Croke Park, they have an overall decision to make with all of this. And I think they've done their living best. I think they performed miracles last year, in my own opinion, running off the championship. This year has been tougher for them. But as you see, we're talking about maybe formats and games and league finals. And look, the optics are not good of not having league finals. But again, we knew this from the outset. And I think counties would nearly rather the free weekend break. Some might not know that could be argued otherwise, but that just sets the context, Mikey, of what's happened over the last few months.
Yeah. Okay. Eamonn, something you wanted to touch on, because we haven't any football to preview this weekend, but one team who obviously have caught everybody's eye, mostly opposition managers like Ryan McMenamin, who described of Derry after they beat them. Derry are a very, very fit team. Very, very fit. A very, very fit team.
Very fit.
Very fit. But I think, Eamonn, beyond their fitness, Rory Gallagher has struck on something here. He's got buy-in from the Shot Neal players and from everybody else. He has Conor Glass back from the AFL. He has in, Chrissy McCaig. He has what people are talking about. There's no sticky cornerbacks or man markers left in football, but there's Chrissy McCaig anyway. Up front he has Shane McGuigan, who we had Oisin on here last week, like just extolling the magnificence of Shane McGuigan. But a lot of that was there previously, and it hadn't quite coalesced. Rory Gallagher's come in with a reputation for playing dour defensive football, and he's turned Derry into the Harlem Globetrotters.
Yeah, no, I've always been kind of, the last couple of years in particular, I've been scratching my head about Derry because they've always had good footballers. They've always had a good style. We played them in an All-Ireland semi-final in 2004. They beat Kerry in the league final in 2008. We see what Schlocknail have done hurling and football-wise. St. Pat's Mahara, their school, their kind of nursery up there, we played them in the Hogan Cup final. We played them in the Paul McGear Cup final. They were in the All-Ireland minor final in 2017. Kerry, David Clifford led, gave them a good beating on the day, but they still got to the All-Ireland minor final. So they've always had players, and I've been kind of wondering, what is going on? Why is there division amongst the clubs? Is there, what was it that was holding them back? But they definitely seem to be in this league. They're exciting. You mentioned the share of the players there, Mikey. I like the look of their goalkeeper, Oran Lynch. I mean, the last day he was playing out in front of the full back line at times, intercepting kickouts from the other side. The spine of the team, Brendan Rodgers, okay, looks like he's a hamstring injury, but him at full back, excellent player. McKenlis is a kind of an attacking centre back. Conor Glass, Emmett Bradley, middle of the field. Shane McGuigan, you mentioned him, outstanding up front. Seems to have got stronger from the times I would have seen him playing with Schlocknail. Lachlan at centre forward is an excellent player. McFall, a good wing forward, working hard. Benny Hearn inside. They've an awful lot of good players, and Rory Gallagher has had an epiphany during the pandemic where he's decided to defend well and also attack. As they're still structured very well defensively. I think what I've seen from them the games is their intensity defensively is higher than a lot of teams at the moment. Up front, they've been very good. I definitely think if I had access to the whole of the high behind from that game the last day, I definitely think there's a couple of very interesting pieces that are worth looking at video analysis wise. I think they're going to get promoted, but in the Ulster Championship, I'll be interested. They are at the hard side of the draw. They're playing Donegal, who'll probably beat down. They're also at the same side as Tyrone, but they're interesting, and I think there's a couple of things about them. Their long kick-out option, I'm not sure about. Their substitutes in terms of the depth of their bench, I'm not sure about yet. But they're looking interesting, and I'll be curious about how they get on the Ulster Championship.
Is there a risk that, well, not a risk, is it a possibility, as what Ricey says, they're very, very fit. Is there a chance that maybe they have been focusing more on fitness than others, and that they'll kind of come back to the pack a little bit when the likes of Donegal, Tyrone, the teams they might face, get a couple more weeks of training in, that maybe we're seeing it in the hurling at least, that there's teams aren't at full pitch in terms of fitness, in terms of intensity, but maybe a little bit of it is that compared to Fermanagh, Cavan and Longford, Derry are just, they're just like championship ready for the league. So
possibly they're probably ahead of those teams, maybe standard wise as well, but I think because the window is so short this year, that's not as much of a consideration. In a traditional league, a team that's flying in February, you can nearly rest assured to come the middle of the summer, they're going to come a cropper. But, most teams go up through the gears. But in fairness to Derry, they are very, very fit. And I think they'll be able to maintain that, no problem. I think avoiding injuries will be the thing for them. Brendan Rodgers, if he's out for a while, he'll be a big loss. But no more than if Michael Murphy's out for Donegal for the preliminary game and even into the second game against Derry, he'll be a huge loss for them. And I just think, look, as usual, the Ulster Championship is going to be very interesting again this year.
And speaking about that, actually, when we were chatting this morning about them coming up as a subject matter, I had a quick look. Since they made the Ulster final in 2011, which, as we know, is a lifetime ago in Gaelic football terms, they've had one win in the Ulster Championship since then. So one win in 10 years in the Ulster Championship. That came against Down in 2015. They've had 2 championship wins in the last 5 years. and that was against Waterford and Wexford, which without being too disrespectful, Mikey, it isn't exactly something you'd be writing letters home at Christmas about.
It's okay, Rory.
They've been flirting down in Division 4 at times. Though and to go back to Eamon's point earlier, given they have traditionally, given the sort of pick they have between Ball and Derry, their prominence in the Ulster Club Championship, Slough-Neil, the success that they've had at underage and at colleges level in Hogan Cup, they're a peculiar side insofar as nobody has really been able to galvanize them in sort of the one direction. And I think, to kind of back up what Eamonn was saying, they will be a very, very interesting dark horse in this year's Ulster Championship, and I think it's a real banana skin for Donegal if Donegal are missing Murphy, which is a very real possibility now.
Yeah. Okay. That's that was a short football chat after a long tennis chat, which I think that's good enough for me. So Eamonn will say thank you very much, and we'll catch you again. We'll get you back to class.
See you, lads.
He hits it, it's over the bar! Oh, holy Moses!
Okay, we're back, and we've been joined by Derek McGrath. How are you getting on, Derek?
How are you getting on, Mikey? Not a bother. All good here.
Good stuff. We'll look ahead to the weekend's action now shortly, but I think there's a couple of things to reflect on out of Wexford and Kilkenny. Derek, the first thing being, I'm talking about Wexford a lot today. Sorry, I'm taking over. It's my show, and I'll do what I want. It's Wexford and Davy. 2019 glorious days. Should have beaten Tipperary down to 14 men, etc., etc. Since then, it hasn't happened, obviously, and maybe we were getting hopeful after especially the comeback win over Clare, which is impressive because Lee Chin had a stinker on the freeze, so to manage that was impressive coming back against 14 men. But the Kilkenny game, admittedly preparation wasn't perfect, but there'd be worrying signs for Wexford hurling fans, I can tell you, as a Wexford hurling fan. What would you think?
Yeah, I'm not so sure. I think if you come off we say that I saw Brendan Cummins had a very good article about maybe perhaps the 19 semi-final is kind of lingering, if you like. But I think if you look even at their league performances last year, they were actually going really well in the league last year, pre-COVID. They actually had a really good comeback victory against Kilkenny in Wexford Park. They beat them, all right, but they were going well last year. So Davy kind of openly came out and kind of, I suppose, felt that they got the preparation wrong last year, that the club scenario kind of maybe crept in and that they were maybe overly tired or, kind of their normal game, which involves a huge amount of output of energy and running, etc., just wasn't there and they weren't firing. So you kind of expected a reaction this year in terms of the trajectory that they're on motivationally, I suppose, and that hasn't happened, I suppose. I think the two things you've mentioned already, the mitigating circumstances around not training really for 12 days, only once in the run-up to the Kilkenny game. The possibility of playing Kilkenny again, if they would all due respect to Leach, and having that kind of carrot and stick where siege mentality, which Davey kind of, not he favours, but he certainly he draws on that kind of, that approach at times, and the power of that later on, if you like, as against the draining of confidence that might be in the air in Wexford. So I'm not sure. He clung to the positives afterwards in terms of the second half, saying they won the second half, but their first half was littered with just lethargic kind of mistakes, and they just look completely devoid of any energy. So very hard to answer the question really that you've asked. But I don't think it's a hangover from 19. I think what happened, even if you look at Clare, how close Clare were in 18. Clare beat or Clare drew with Galway, I think, in a classic semi-final again in Croke Park. They had a replay in third this week, and what dominated 19 then was Clare are very close. You're very close. Even ourselves in 17, we're a puck of the ball away from winning All-Ireland. We listened to a winter down here of, geez, you're a young team, you're very close. So, that can have its effect, but I don't think it's the case in Wexford. I think Wexford will be ready to kick on again in the summer. That'd be my expectation, but that's, I'm not basing it on a form line, so I don't know what I'm basing it on.
Yeah, I couldn't let it pass. But what was that winter of 17-18 like for you as a manager? Then you were that close, as you say. You had a young team who were, being lauded, kind of winning individual awards, kind of being told that you're close, you can win it next year. nobody consciously loses motivation or begins to believe the hype, but these things can happen. Did you notice it at the time, or did you notice it afterwards, or do you think it was a negligible effect?
You got destroyed by injuries, though, Derek, didn't you?
Yeah, I know we did. Look, I cling to that as well, but I knew, I just knew. And if you're playing a cute game, which you often do with managers, sometimes, you get out when you know what's coming. But I just felt the kind of, I suppose, Jesus, I'm not building myself up, but a kind of sense of honor to the lads to kind of stay at it, And it was, I just felt it. Like, we spent the winter, for instance, fundraising for the team holiday, and there was just distraction in the air, if you like, whereas the machinations of a Kilkenny or Dublin that are used to that process, they're used to the whole, we're going on the team holiday. I remember being in Cancun on New Year's Eve, and we were having the time of our lives then. And I just remember saying to myself, we're in bother here. At the same time, subconsciously having a few points, enjoying it, saying this is a memory that will last forever, but kind of saying we're in trouble here. In my own head, just kind of a vibe. Nothing. So I remember reading McGuinness's book where he actually talked about the year after they won the All-Ireland. He said they were kind of relying on hope for the first time in their life, kind of hope, just basing things on hope. And that's where we were. And then we were in a similar situation actually to Davy, in that we were relegated from the league. Not that there's any relegation for Wexford this year. We had all our eggs into one basket for the championship down in Ennis. And we kind of had said that earlier in the league. And then obviously we picked up a huge amount of injuries, but we kind of saw it out, if you like, without obviously the goal controversy, that kind of stuff. But look, it's a kind of a feeling that you can't really do anything about, if that makes sense, because you're trying to balance keeping the air of positivity, and we can get it back as against it. That's why the Waterford story of last year and this year is, I think their trajectory is
very different. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
Some of the fellas like Patrick Curran and them, they've been there 8 years on the panel, so they had the natural dip, and I think we're actually ignoring them as kind of pundits, if you like, in terms of how good they actually are. And I think that's another, probably come on to that later.
Yeah, no, I'm writing them down on the list now. We're not going to go. No, they were there anyway. They were there anyway. Damien, how much of this, like Wexford kind of Wexford's performance, or say Limerick, how they've gone so far, how much of this could be put down to a 3-week pre-season and the fact that it's obvious to the naked eye of even idiots like me that teams aren't playing at the intensity that you've come to expect from inter-county hurling, not just championship hurling, but Allianz League hurling as well in a normal year, is played at a pitch and an intensity and a speed that I don't think we've seen yet this year.
Yeah, so I suppose to answer that, Mikey, I'll bring it back maybe just back to that Wexford Tipperary game, the All-Ireland semi-final. And
you would. Just
to pick up on what Derek was talking about then. I felt that I seldom saw Wexford play as well as they did that day. They were absolutely swarming Tipperary. They were finding space, they were cutting through, and Derry could know the intricate passing channels that they had, and they were finding room down the wings, but they were finding room in the centre. I think John McGrath got put off. I was wondering, like, where do Tip go from here? And then Wexford retreated a little bit. Now, Davy might argue with that or whatever, but they fell back a little bit, and they fell back into the pocket, and they allowed Tipperary to pick them off. And once Tipperary got that momentum, it was unbelievable. And that feeds into what Derek was saying then. And poor old Derry, I feel sorry for him that he was over in Cancun on New Year's Eve and couldn't enjoy it, because that's the scourge of inter-county management that never leaves your side, I would imagine, and that haunts you no matter how well you're doing. It reminds me of, again, go back to my own county, and forgive the bias, but it reminds me of the Tipperary footballers last year when they won the Munster final, and everybody was, speculating, would they push on now? Will they drive it on? And, you're looking to and all the rest of it, but then you face into the new season, and literally half the team is gone. And you have 7 players out through travel, Collins back in Sydney Swans, but the rest of the lads are out injured. And, they played Kildare in the challenge game, picked up more injuries, and haven't had half the team available to them since then. So that reflects what Derek's talking about. So you look at the Wexford squad since then, a couple of players, have been struggling with injury. There's no point saying otherwise. They have been there a number of years at this stage. But would I be panicking after the Kilkenny game, which I felt they were lifeless in, to be honest with you? I wouldn't. I would look to the Clare game, their comeback in that Clare game. And I would use that more as a gauge than the Wexford Kilkenny challenge last weekend. And I think that game was played in the backdrop of uncertainty. A lot of the COVID thing was used as a backdrop. But the main point is the two teams are going to face each other again in a few weeks, and I'm not so sure if Davy needed to come out with all guns blazing. Brian Cody will always come out trying to win every game, so that goes without question. But no, if I'm looking for a gauge of where Wexford are at this year, and they're not great at the moment, but the little bit of fight they showed in Clare is an indicator to me that there is still a bit of a light in that camp yet, you know.
I hope so. I'll quit the navel gazing now. Rory, on the other side of that match was just a phenomenal performance from TJ Reid. Well, it is a phenomenal. It's just kind of a TJ Reid performance. Yeah. He scored 118. Yeah. So the positive is TJ Reid scored 118, and isn't he a gift to us all? But the other side of that is there's 19 scored by the rest of the Kilkenny players, and like Brian Cody has a gift in TJ Reid, but is TJ Reid masking some kind of unusual kind of shortcomings perhaps in the Kilkenny attack?
He probably is, and he probably is this year, and he probably did last year, and maybe even the year before. And people will say that can't continue because TJ is obviously pushing on a little bit. The flip side to that, though, is he keeps himself in incredible shape. There's no off season with TJ. He is an absolute specimen. I mean, he's 34, I think, Damien, if I'm not mistaken. But he is like in terms of his physique, I'd say there's easily another 2 to 3 years in TJ if he has the hunger to continue. And by then, given the tradition and the history and the conveyor belt and what Kilkenny will have coming through, I'm sure they'll find hurlers that will come in and supplement it. Will they find someone of similar quality? Probably not. No. But again, like, how often does a hurler like TJ come along? I mean, you're talking once in a generation. I heard Don Logue once describe him as having the sort of the physique and the strength and the sort of bull mentality of Christy Ring mixed with the graft and the guile of a Frank Cummins. And that just scared the bejesus out of me. Like,
you say once in a generation, Roy, but Derek, if there isn't another TJ Reid come through, if it isn't Adrian Mullen or whatever, you are actually breaking a line of like obscene hurlers that goes back to the early 90s, from DJ to Henry to TJ, which... Now, they weren't one-man team by any means. Only an idiot would think that. But they were, there was teams built on them, you could say. And, like, Kilkenny fans have got used for the last almost 30 years to having, like, the best forward in the country on their team.
Yeah, and look, again, bringing the Waterford side into it, I just remember the 08 final. He was only coming on as a sub. He came on with 25 minutes to go and got 5 points from the 08 final. As a Waterford, and watching that, like, you're kind of saying to yourself, where is this? He go back to the apprenticeship that Richie Hogan himself, he still had to serve in a certain apprenticeship before he kind of, came into the squad, if you like, and came into the team and being as central as he is to it now. Yeah, I'd have a fairly good kind of on the ground feeling for between the schools here and Kieran's and Kenny CBS, and without saying that it's going to dry up. The TJ Reid is not standing out there as he might have done.
You'd have probably heard. You'd have probably heard about him anyway if there was one coming through. Derek. The word. In Waterford, for instance, we were really good minor. You're so close.
Patrick Fitzgerald's a really good minor. There's young Carl O'Neill that's gone into the Limerick panel.
In
terms of guys that are speculating, there's no real name there that people are speculating about. And actually, therein maybe perhaps lies the danger of other teams in terms of their underestimating of Kilkenny in terms of the collective, what they can produce all of a shot, if you like. And I think that's worth bearing in mind. But yeah, look, he's a phenomenal player. And the thing about him is he has to deal every time he goes out. Like when we used to detail Philip Manny for him, he gets Matthew Hanlon for 75 minutes up in his face, plus somebody else in his face.
Owen O'Donnell with Dublin.
O'Donnell, he gets he had Joseph Coney following around for the last and Dahi Burke. So it's not exactly a scenario where you go out, you're in one corner and you go into the perceived back or wing. There's another thing at play here where he has to bloody deal with a fella up in his face all the way through.
Man marker on the opposition team.
But Rory, you're right. He's risen to the occasion every single time. Like, I mean, I think, as you say, he's 34 later this year, November, I think. And it's Derek, you were saying about coming on as a sub in 08. It's not all that long ago where Shefflin had to have a chat with him to kind of...
He was going to pack it in, I think.
Yeah, he was frustrated.
Yeah.
He was frustrated, yeah. And I'll always remember, like, they were playing ye one day, Derek, and looking at the bench that Kilkenny had. It was like the Harlem Globetrotters on the bench. And he'd have had to contend with that, being sidelined and not getting enough game time for quite a while. I'm not so sure. I hate putting figures on it because I'm useless, but I think around 2012 he was really, really disillusioned with it. It might have been a bit after that even, but Henry put the arm around him and chatted to him. And just, I know from even interviewing him after games, his physique as just, you know, like in terms of, he's obviously into that industry anyway, but I think in terms of his nutrition, his lifestyle, even his rest, the way he approaches the game, he has climbed up 2 or 3 different levels. Like he's always TJ Reid gifted hurler, but he wasn't always TJ Reid superstar. That's definitely come in over the last few years. But you're right.
Even he's very calm as well, Damien. I find he's very calm in terms of
yeah. He's made for it, Derek. Like, because interviewing him afterwards, he'll actually give you an honest answer, but he's not getting carried away. Like, I mean, I'd say I've given him more crystal over the years than the MD of Waterford Crystal has produced in his tenure. And you know, he's very, very respectful and very, very grateful, and he treats all the camera crew with respect. He chats to everybody.
He's a gent.
But that's it straight away. It's gone next game, and because he knows there's a Dahi Burke, or there's an Owen O'Donnell, or there's somebody coming for him very, very soon again.
Yeah, as a manager, Derek, is there a temptation to become reliant, like to say, okay, we, like almost like the Mighty Ducks, just you could have it, you could have a strategy, you could have a game plan, or you could just say give it to TJ. Is that something? Is it a sensible thing to do when you have one of the best hurlers of the modern era who can score 180 in the game? Like, just give him the ball, or is that potentially kind of scuppering your team to do such a thing?
Well, I think if you track that back to the principles of Brian's teams over the years, even when there was a rare day where Henry might have an off day, Brian would be straight on camera talking about how many hooks, how many blocks, how many turnovers he got. Like, you know, and I think it's the same thing with TJ in terms of if he's held. I think Brian will still espouse how hard he worked for the team. The one thing I would say about TJ is that he used him very cleverly at full forward. Even in the semi-final a couple of years ago, he went in corner forward on Sean Finn for a few minutes. He went, you know, a few years ago, the great semi-final against Limerick, and then he was wing forward on Dan Morrissey. You know, he's used really well, like, you know, and look, I'm not sure it's the conversation in Kilkenny, like, it's up to you, Walter, it's up to you, Richie, it's up to you, Billy Ryan, to step up in the absence of TJ, or in the case of TJ being held, if you like, on a given day. But look, he's nailed on for 10, 11 points from frees at any given day. And it's distractive. It's like canning, I suppose we call it. You put all your focus on him over the years, and next minute he's withdrawn, he's going 100 yards from the goal, he's bringing someone with him, and it's game over then because the space has been created by him himself, and he has that ability too.
Yeah. But that team ethic, though, Mikey, will stand true no matter who's playing that Kilkenny team, because I remember around the time they were dominant and winning All-Ireland after All-Ireland, especially when they're going for 5 in a row, they were outworking the opposition like 60, I think roughly average, about 63 to 67 hooks, blocks and tackles per game to the opponent's 44, 46. And that was with the greatest hurlers of all time on the field. So, like, Cody's not going to let that work ethic ever decline, and that's what keeps them in games, and that's what maybe left them beat Limerick a couple of seasons ago unexpectedly, you know.
Yeah, and when I remember one of his greatest performances, actually, for without scoring much, Ballyhale played Ballygunner in the All-Ireland Cup semi 2 years ago. Yes. Philip Manny normally for Ballygunner would do what I would say every centre back would do. He'd kind of follow his man, he'd stay back around, kind of to D, if you like. But Philip went toe to toe with TJ. Whole match. TJ didn't score from play, right? But TJ dragged Philip all over the field, 110, 120 yards from all the way down to the other side of the field. Philip was just detailed to mark him. And Owen Cody, Adrian Mullen in the 1-4 and were able to reap the benefits of his.
Yeah. Yeah, we should mention Billy Ryan did score 1-4 the other day against Wexford, so it's not like there's nobody up there or anything like that. It's just the maybe
the rest of the Kilkenny forwards though, Mikey, wouldn't have too many defences quaking in their boots. That's the big difference, and
Yeah.
that's the one thing that TJ brings to the table that Kilkenny will sorely miss when he does go.
Well,
No, you're right, Rory,
He's
but
there.
they'll survive because it likes of John Donnelly, who puts
Yeah,
in 3.5 shifts. And by the way, we spoke about TJ Reid. That game we mentioned earlier in the football part of the show, Rory, about Shane McGuigan. I think McGuigan ended up marking Reid that day for periods of time too. I think he ended up going hammer and tongues, if I can remember it. Yeah. Anyway.
We'll move on to this weekend's action, lads. There's a couple of corkers in there. Not least the Saturday night game, which is Limerick versus Cork. Obviously, Limerick's league hasn't been optimal, but I think any fear of relegation might be staved off in their final game against Westmeath. So I don't think it's time for panic stations. As Shane Dowling said in his column last week, said there's obituaries, there's career obituaries being written in Limerick off the back of a few league matches with a league with a 3-week lead in. So we're not there at all. But Derek, it might get their juices flowing now to welcome a Cork side who've been getting some good press to the Gaelic grounds on
some bad press
Saturday.
as well.
Some bad press as well, but I'd be interested, I suppose, to a large extent, what you think Donal O'Grady has brought, and would I be way off the mark to say that you would have been quite influenced by Donal O'Grady's teams of the noughties and what they did to the game of hurling? I don't think it'd be too far off the mark to say that.
Yeah, I would. I've been a kind of a fan, I suppose, of the possession game and the short game, etc. I think there's an issue here for on the outside, if you like, in terms of Cork. Like, first of all, I actually don't think it's anything new. Right? So that I put my own opinion on that. Like, it might be new from last year, maybe for Cork, but we couldn't. It's very hard to judge last year, winter championship, etc. I think the general perception around Cork over the last few years has been they don't work hard enough, and that's been justified in some regards. How together they've been. So I think
don't work hard enough, and they're a bit soft.
Yeah. Now, look, and I'd have an opinion.
I'll say it because you mightn't be able to.
No, but I'd have a strong opinion that there's no inter-county players soft. Is there inconsistency? Is there inconsistency? Is there underperformance? Is there kind of mental frailties at times? I think there is at times with all teams, and that can happen with management. Never mind say team. So I think that's kind of a. So I suppose, to answer your question, I suppose in terms of the influence of Donal O'Grady or his influence on us as managers or the team, we played Cork in 17, for instance. Cork had played Tipperary in the first round. It was the debut year of Shane Kingston, Darragh Fitzgibbon, Mark Coleman, right, 17.
Luke Meade, yeah.
And I would have noticed that, if you remember 16, right, Kieran's first year, Cork played William Egan actually as a sweeper.
That's right. Yeah.
In front of Shane Cahill and Damian
against
Cahill,
Tipperary, and it didn't work at all.
There was widespread criticism of it, and it really looked to me that it kind of almost permeated the approach of the management, if you like, right? So the following year, what they did then is they disguised the sweeper a bit easier, a bit better. Like. So they put Mark Ellis really deep, and their half forward line were extremely deep, a la kind of Waterford, Limerick, all the teams I suppose that have been doing it in the last few years, and they broke that pace with Fitzgibbon and Shane Kingston and Luke Meade, etc., using the ball with real pace and with real kind of direction. Now, the criticism has come because the Tipperary game where it was over and back and it was a bit lateral. It's an execution thing, I think, as much as anything. It's the pace of the couple of weeks. I'll give you a personal example. I remember we played the 16 league final against Clare. First match, we received widespread criticism in terms of I think it was low scoring, etc. We played the replay the following Sunday. It was high scoring. It was 4-18 to whatever the score was. We played the exact same way. The commentary afterwards was the shackles are off. The shackles were off. Everything was loose. Just left them out to play. And when we come out afterwards and say, sure, we played no different. It was the exact same. People are saying, no, Jesus, no. That's a load of bull or whatever. Yeah. So I think, it's a long-winded answer I'm giving you. I think that's going to face Cork now. They're going to get a bit of this. They're going to get, and it's the strength of the management and players combined to be able to kind of stick the course.
All that out, yeah.
Stick the course, and because that's going to be difficult, I would perceive.
And Derry, there's no crowd in the ground. Do you know the point I'm making? If Páirc Uí Chaoimh was packed and they're trying to play like that, and they're getting done for over carrying, the crowd will let you know about it. Now, maybe you'll answer that. Maybe does that put pressure on you then?
It does, and players are human. Like have a situation like We showed a clip last Sunday night, for instance, with Kilkenny, where TJ was the only guy inside the whole half of the field, right? And if there's a crowd in there and that ball is hit up and Matthew O'Hanlon wins it as opposed to TJ, that collective sigh is going to come, man. And I can tell you, you might say you're in the zone on a day of a match and you can't hear it, but if it comes regularly, it's just, look, it's a kind of a debate. But I don't think it's as new as people think. I think in the 70s they actually played like that. And I think in the 05-06 under O'Grady, they kept the ball. Cody, if you looked at Cody's interview on Sunday after match, he kind of said he didn't want to hear tell of Kilkenny are playing a different way. So he kind of said, we have a saying, you give the ball to the fella in the best position. Like, he kind of,
What about win your own ball?
So it's kind of, he had a simplification of it done for maybe some people that like to overcomplicate or perceive to overcomplicate.
It does. That style of play, because we've seen it with Wexford, seen it with Limerick to an extent, and obviously with Waterford. It takes, like, I can only imagine the drills that are done, like the training, the repetition over and over and over again. But we've all seen it for our own counties or in teams opposing, that when it clicks, all of a sudden it looks like, oh, well, this makes perfect sense. Whereas, like, I've seen it with Wexford, where the games when it didn't work, you're like tearing your hair out and you're one of those old fellas. And we ever just leave it into the edge of the square. And then the next day, these hand passes and the timing's right and the guy's running off the shoulder, the hand pass is right. And all of a sudden, so that's what they want to do. So I don't know. We've all seen it repeatedly in the last 5, 6, 7 years, but I still think when it's your own county and it's not working,
did you guys see the stat with Tipperary, for example, whereby, now not an official stats person, but the stat came out from a guy in the county that does it like that. Out of the 10 direct long balls that were going into the attack, only 3 were won. And that's why that's forced them into a rethink this year as well, So, but look, that criticism would have been there for a long time, that tip forwards weren't able to win their own ball. That's going back 20 years. But just when you see it broken down, I think, Derry, what you were saying, it's not new, but it's definitely more over exaggerated. I think the possession, they're definitely they're going through every single channel possible, I think, aren't they, this time?
Yeah. And but the other thing I will say, though, I think, and just know Kieran relatively well, and Christie's involved there, Christy O'Connor, and a few guys behind the scenes. And I think every county manager is probably talking about flexibility, like that. They're trying to get a mixture of short and be able to then go into Patrick Horgan and Cadogan early as well when the space opens up, or be able to go into an Aaron Gallagher and a Jamie Flanagan when the space opens up, or be able to situate Conor McDonald with Rory O'Connor for a few minutes inside, or be able to situate, like if you have a situation where you have Bubbles and Callan inside, or you have Bubbles or Shamie Callan and John McGrath inside, you're going to try and get it in early as well, at times. So I don't, I think it's easy to kind of say, we're playing a new game, but I think within the kind of the bowels of Temple Stadium or Park Queeve or Welsh Park here, they're talking about mixing it up, and they're not also forgetting the ferocity that they need as to underpin all that approach. I think that's sometimes we lose sight of that, the key principles of your team.
Yeah, and as for Limerick, Rory, obviously we mentioned there's the slight bit of hysteria that which you'll get early in the year. An unbeaten record is well and truly gone now, but there was, I wouldn't say John Kiley was dealing in hyperbole when he said there was a lot to be happy with after that match down in Walsh Park the last day. There was a lot in it that was probably the Limerick of old. They just came up against a very good Waterford team, and that, he won't be getting overly worried, I would imagine, would he? Was my point.
There were some things that he would be happy with, but I'd say there would probably be more things that he would be unhappy with. I think one of the big issues, like they're going in, like they're playing Cork, obviously at home, in front of no crowd, which probably, takes away a little bit of the advantage. Fair enough. It's live on TV, which is great. It's on RTÉ as well. I think the biggest issue for them is, and again, be very interested in Derek's view and Damien's view, because Damien would have a very long-standing tradition of and history of and understanding this. To me, Limerick look like a team that have, dined out on a little bit of success and now have a massive target on their back, and as a result, everyone's coming for them. And they got a bit cranky. And I think that's actually very, very natural. It happens. Like if you talk to Tomas O'Shea, or if you talk to Henry, or any, like, now Kilkenny were a bit more cold-blooded, but like if you talk to teams that enjoy success after a long period of having none, Claire from the 90s, Dalo, will tell you that they will get cranky because everyone is coming for you, whether it's the media, whether it's the opposition, whether you think that it's refereeing, whether it's everything. And then it starts to create that siege mentality, which I don't think serves anybody any purpose whatsoever. And I think Limerick need to be careful. I think that's what you saw with his apology the last time, that they don't go down that road of siege mentalities, because that really only gets you so far. I think they just have to trust in themselves that they will get their form back. I think they have a great opportunity to do that this weekend, and I think they will. One caveat that I would add to it all is I heard on the nighttime program after last year's All-Ireland final, Jackie and a few others make mention of the fact that there was potential dynasties starting. And in fairness to them, they're in a very lucrative position as things stand. They have won 2 of the last 3. They've won a batch of leagues. They've won a couple of Munster championships, and it's very, very successful from a Limerick perspective. But I never really felt they were so far ahead that all the chase and pack needed to be worried, and that there was going to be this kind of Kilkenny style era of dominance that we were all facing into. I kind of always thought that, okay, they beat Waterford well in the All-Ireland final last year. That All-Ireland final was played obviously in very different circumstances to the one that we're going to be playing, that one that's going to be contested this year, because it's winter versus summer, and we all know they're 2 different sports. And the chase and pack were never that far off. Now, you could be looking at a few suspensions. They might pick up a few injuries. A little bit of hunger just takes a little bit of the edge off. All of a sudden, you could get caught by a Cork or get caught by a Tipperary, and then all of a sudden you find yourself out in your arse in the early rounds or whatever. So I think from Limerick's perspective, it's just a case this weekend, get themselves back up onto the horse. They probably need the win more so than Cork, I would suggest, because I think if Cork lose, they've had a reasonably good campaign so far in terms of the performances that they've put in. So I think, is there a bit more pressure on them? There probably is. There's a bit more focus on them. There probably is. But that comes with being champions, and it's just something they're going to have to learn to live with.
Rory is one of the doomsayers, I see. Derek, how about that crankiness then? Because again, it's something Shane Dowling touched on in his column last week. He was delighted, he said, to see Kyle Hayes get that red card. Well, not that he got the red card, but he said that fight at the end, he said it showed him a lot, and Shane would know these players very well. So is crankiness, is siege mentality always a bad thing, and do you see it in this Limerick team?
Well, it's not sustainable. It's good for a one-off performance.
Yeah.
It's good for maybe 2 performances where, you often hear Paul O'Connell talking about, we're better when we're bitter, I think, for Munster rugby over the year, but the sustainability, I'd say, is questionable. If Waterford were to meet Limerick, I remember Limerick played there in a very fairly heated league game I'd say last year, the year before, and I remember saying to myself, the first time I saw John really animated on the line against Donald Maloney and Jerry O'Connor, I was saying there's a bit of storage here, and they come back, with a combination of vicious savagery and good play. So look, but it's the sustainability of it. Rory is right. There's a great book you probably read, Hunger in Paradise, Rasmus Ankerson. He talks about, and Gavin would be big into this now, burning your trophies, and that you treat defeat with as much skepticism as you do victory. And I think Limerick will be okay in that regard, because I think they've probably acknowledged exactly what Rory has just said there. In terms of, look, we're cranky. We need to. It's
just a little bit of crankiness. I think that they can flush out of their system quite easily.
Yeah, and that's my very point. I think they will have acknowledged that there was things they got right, but hang on, let's have a look at this kind of element that we need to kind of fix. And I'd say with Corrad involved, I'd say that she has a major role in that whole kind of refocusing of what's important here, you know what I mean? And I think look, I know that it probably done a huge amount of work in the whole area of vulnerability, and I'd say they're vulnerable now, and I think they'll twist it to kind of not to suit themselves in a siege mentality way, but maybe a combination of that with a refocusing in terms of getting its trajectory right, and I think they'll do that Saturday, even if they don't win.
Even if they don't win,
even if that might make sense to but.
Yeah, no, it does. And Damien on the other side, then Waterford it's kind of something we've talked about a couple of times already. To the kind of from one season to the other, kind of keeping the head level. How impressed have you been with Waterford and how they've just picked up? Because that was a galling All-Ireland final, obviously a very tough defeat to take. But whatever is said, by your county man in the off season or however he's dealt with it, they do seem to be coming strong.
And when when I heard like the players that were missing this year from Waterford are going to be missing, I automatically wondered, Jesus, where's the kick going to come from this time around? But it has, like, but if you were down the likes of Mahoney or De Burka or Fives, and you're
goalkeeper, to lose your goalkeeper as well, Damien, like, you know, a top class keeper, like Saki.
I suppose he probably went at an early stage, and you're right, I didn't even factor him in because the lads kind of came after him. But it's certainly, and Derek would know, like Stephen would have been so crucial to the restarts and the way the Waterford play. I suppose there is always a chance for somebody else. But look, Mikey Beavens is a great coach. He's a cousin of mine, I have to say as well, hold my hands up. And Cahill, in fairness to him, is a good, solid, straight manager with plenty of success. And they're very, very driven. And they're going into a group of players that Derek would know well that are equally driven, I think. And with the work rate and work ethic that they have, they always have a chance. I think they're a very honest bunch. I think they'll have a big game at the weekend that can go an awful long way, I think, towards telling what their season might look like. But certainly I give them way more hope now than I did a few weeks ago when I heard the number of big names that were missed, if that makes any sense.
It does. Derek, you referenced it as well, and you're impressed with how they're going. Of the kind of the new lads who've come in or whatever, are many, obviously you know who they were, but have you been kind of surprised in any way by how quick they've kind of knitted into inter-county hurling, or was this a case of you knew that there was ready-made replacements there?
Yeah, I'd want to be saying I knew. It's very self-indulgent, but like I actually did up a few stats before we came on there. I'm saying there's actually 19 of the 26 that were involved in the county panel for the All-Ireland last year that have been there 6 or more years. It's
a bit of experience there.
Yeah, so like, the guys who have come in have probably served Shane McNulty, Conor Prunty, Peter Hogan, all these guys that have come in, they've actually been there a good amount. Like Patrick Curran was the highest scorer in the league in 2016. And, he came in and got 3 points. He said, I heard him being described as a new player, this is Patrick's seventh year, and there's an argument to be made that Waterford are about to peak, actually, I know it sounds probably inconceivable for some.
I really like them.
Like Austin is in 26th year. They're like, they won the minor All-Ireland in 2013, and they're free from a little bit of expectation in terms of when you lose Tig, when you lose Porrig, the media comes back off you and they kind of say, yeah, listen, Waterford, I think they might beat someone, but they won't be, it won't be too consistent. And I think you have a very hungry group of players. Really, and I think they're one thing they have over nearly every team. They are the quickest team nearly in the championship in terms of pace, like Caleb Lyons, Jamie, Stephen Bennett. And very, very cleverly last week, you had Shane Bennett back in the squad last week, for the Limerick game, had Desi Hutchinson back in the team. They didn't light it up. No one was talking about it, but I can tell you, Shane Bennett is a serious player. Yeah. He is a really good player, and he will come eventually. So I think it's not inconceivable that Waterford will be playing Tip in the last round of the league to win the league. I think it's.
And Derek, tell me this much: is there any chance we'll see Tig De Burka this year? Unlikely, I would imagine. Is it?
Look, unlikely. I've the only contact I've had with Tig now in the last couple of months, we had one of our own lads, young lads, Torres Trucy here, under 15, and I got Tig to ring him. So I would never even entertain asking him where he fixed. In the role you're in now, you kind of just. The most advanced. Porrig is the most advanced. Tig seems to have taken a step back in terms of training away from the panel. Is it a possible situation where we will see him coming close to the championship? I don't think so. I'm not sure. I'm not sure, to be honest, to answer that question. I'd be very close to Tig, but yet I haven't had much contact with him. If that makes sense.
That makes sense.
But before we leave, there's one question I want to ask Derek while we have you, and we're talking about Waterford. What would you describe Austin Gleeson's role as at the moment, and would you say it is the best use of Austin Gleeson, which is a conundrum that has baffled for years?
Oh, look, it never baffled me, to be honest with you. I'm going to demonstrate on this. It's like remember again, I'll personalise it. I suppose we're beat heavily in that semi-final at 17 by Cork in the Munster semi-final, and the word around here was Austin needs a position. We played him centre forward for the rest of the championship, and he played everywhere else bar centre forward. So the point I make, I suppose, is will he score 3 points from play from centre back in most games? He possibly would, which he possibly will score as much from there. It's the conundrum for Liam is he hasn't Tyg, and Tyg is his next best. You know, kind of. You know, Tyg is his man for 6, like, and his man for sitting 6 or doing the job that's needed as a 6. So it looked like with the Limerick game was a game that they had in mind for targeting.
Right.
In terms of their approach, like with Prunty at 3 and Austin at 6. So I think I think the balance of the team was probably best served at the minute with him at 6. You know, at the minute. You know? And look, with the wall that's in front of you now in terms of 5 or 6 players, Austin could be able to put the ball on the hurley at 6, like Caleb 9 at 5, and go from 5 and 6 as well. So it doesn't just he can have Jamie Barr, he can have Kevin Moore that sit at centre back for a few minutes while he's midfield.
You change game to game,
Not a bad conundrum to have now. Wasn't trying to say it was a problem. It was just something that interested us all. It's a national pastime where to play out completion. All right, lads, I enjoyed that chat. Thanks very much. Just to say, as Rory mentioned, that game between Limerick and Cork is live on RTÉ television, and as always, Saturday and Sunday Sport will have you well covered, as will we on the internet, on the RTÉ app and the RTÉ News app and the RTÉ website. So that's about it. Thank you very much. Marathon show this week. Good effort, everybody. Even you, Derek. You only came in for a half, but you know, a finisher, as Eddie Jones says.
I'm well used to coming off the bench.
All right. We'll catch you all again next week. Thank you very much.
Crucial from this. How much longer will the referee allow? Dublin lead by a point, and there's the whistle. It's over. It's over.
We earned it by winning the last 2 matches on the road, and that's not going to be taken away from us.
But what I love in hurling, I love players that will never give in.
He hits it. It's over the bar.